All right, I am going to go ahead and start. It is 11 o'clock. So I will start our seminar on racial and ethnic diversity in the CU schools. I do have to tell you that since this is my 18th year in the Champaign schools, the majority of the information is from Champaign. Urbana seems to have a little bit better record than Champaign does, but there are some places where you're going to see some comparisons between statistics in Champaign and Urbana. Renee Westfield is on too. She is a teacher of the global majority. She was my daughter's fourth grade teacher, and I think that was 2004 or 2005, and she's been with Unit 4 ever since then. So I'm going to go through, show slides, and then if she would like to comment on anything after that, or if you guys have questions, we'll do that at the end. And everybody can see the screen, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. So history first, just a little bit of history. Primarily about Champaign schools, but May Hawkins was the first Black teacher in Champaign-Urbana. She taught at a Champaign school, Lawhead School, which was all Black, and that was in 1934. Odelia Wesley was a teacher at BT Washington. She became the principal in 1952. Again, that was an all Black school. In 1954, Brown, of course, versus the Board of Education ended legal segregation of schools. However, Champaign continued with all Black, all white schools for a while there. In 1961, the League of Women Voters found that Champaign had the worst housing segregation in the state, which I thought was pretty interesting. 1968, with the assistance from the University of Illinois, Champaign finally started addressing segregation of schools by making BT Washington a magnet school. So they put these great programs there, hoping to attract white students to a school that was in the North End and was almost 100% Black. What happened then, though, is that most of the Black students that were attending there could no longer get into that school, and they were bused to the white schools, which tended to be in the south and west of Champaign. In 1996, John Lee Johnson and Herb Stevens. And John Lee Johnson was a Black activist from Champaign. Herb Stevens was a multimillionaire white man from Paxton, but he really supported what John Lee Johnson and other people in Champaign were trying to do. So he supported them with money. They filed a complaint with the U.S. Department of Education, the Office of Civil Rights, claiming that Champaign was putting undue travel burdens on Black families, that there were large achievement gaps between Black and white students. There was underrepresentation of Black students in high-level courses, and there was overrepresentation of Blacks in special ed. There were other things in this suit they filed, but those were the main points. So in 1997, what Unit 4 did was put in place choice-based diversity-conscious enrollment. They were hoping to balance schools by race. So if you're not familiar with choice, and this choice is still a thing in Champaign schools, you mark down, I think it's your first 5 school choices in order. All the data is sent out east, and a computer assigns you to a school based on your choices. They do take into consideration how close you live to the school. If you're within 1.5 miles, you have more priority than somebody who's further away, or if you have siblings at that school. But they also try to balance by race. However, it didn't seem to do much to address the civil or the suit filed by Johnson and Stevens. So in 2002, the Champaign Unit 4 School District was ordered into the consent decree with the Black plaintiffs. In 2006, the district was told to add 200 classroom seats north of University. So what they tried to do was pass a $66 million bond referendum to build new schools north of University. However, what happened 1 week before the referendum, they announced the location of the planned new school in the Boulder Ridge area. The Boulder Ridge area is far northwest Champaign. It's primarily white middle class. So yes, those seats were north of University, but they were put in a white neighborhood. So Amani Bazell, who some of you may know, she is a Black activist, was very active at that time. She and others canvassed neighborhoods, made calls, explaining this was not at all what they wanted, and the referendum was defeated. So Unit 4 still has to look at putting those 200 seats north of University. So in 2006, the Great Campus was proposed, and it was an idea brought from the U of I. It was supposed to be on the site of Columbia School, and Columbia is on the corner of Neal Street and Bradley. And they were going to tear that school down, and they were going to build a new school and connect it to Stratton, which is directly south of Columbia, into the Early Childhood Center. And this would be a K-8 school. It would be a huge complex. They would have room to give training to teachers, to parents, all sorts of stuff. I vaguely remember this, but nothing came of it. So I don't know exactly what happened there, but it did not come to be. So in 2007, the Supreme Court decision, parents involved in community schools, limited districts' ability to consider race in school assignments. So in 2009, Unit 4 changed their choice assignments and revised them to use free and reduced lunch status as a basis for assigning schools instead of race. In the meantime, too, they also did eventually put 200 extra seats north of University. They put 200 more seats at Garden Hills School, elementary school. To this day, that school has never been filled. They have a lot of space up there. 2009, the district and the plaintiffs signed a settlement agreement ending the consent decree, and the district agreed to continue working inequities. They agreed to create an Education Equity Excellence Committee, which they still have that committee. It meets fairly regularly. And they said they would revise the special education policy. So in 2011, a $5 million grant was awarded to the district to create magnet schools at Booker T. Washington, Stratton, and Garden Hills. All these schools are on the north end of Champaign. They were to create magnet schools. The magnet schools were designed to diversify enrollment and improve student achievement. So they were hoping to pull white students from the South up to the magnet schools. However, in 2015, white, Asian, and non-low income students did perform significantly above the state average on standard-based tests, while low income and Black students performed significantly below the average. Hispanics were slightly below. So the achievement gap was actually widening from where it had been. Low income and non-low income, as well as Black and white achievement gaps, were greater than the state average. And then one final thing on the history, this was done in Champaign, and this was something that I was particularly upset about. In 2019, the administration and the school board proposed switching Garden Hills School with the International Prep Academy School. International Prep Academy is our dual language school. It is on Kirby Avenue at Kirby and Madison, pretty close. Garden Hills is just to the east of Madison, to the south of 74. It is a neighborhood school, although a lot of students are unable to walk to it because there's a train track. And if there's a major train track and you're even half a mile from the school, you have to be bused. But it was a neighborhood school. So what they were proposing was busing all of the Garden Hills neighborhood down south to IPA and then putting IPA up at Garden Hills. Their reason being IPA wanted to expand into a K-8 school. And Garden Hills had a lot of space that wasn't filled. There was a lot of community feedback that said, no, we can't do this. And eventually they did not do that. And some of you may know they spent many millions of dollars building at the International Prep Academy to make it large enough to get K-8. So another look back to 2015 at our gifted classes. So 3% of Black students were in gifted classes in 2015. 3% of Hispanic students were in gifted classes. 2% of low-income students. 8% of white students were in gifted classrooms, and 37% of Asian students. Our gifted classrooms are at elementary school. Looking at the honors classes in that same time period, 39% of the Black student population was in honors classes at middle school, 52% of the Hispanic population, 43% of the low income population, 74% of the white population, and 89% of the Asian population. I would tend to say you've got over probably about 60% of all students in honors, so I'm not exactly sure why they had that at the time. AP classes, again in 2015, these are advanced placement classes. 27% of the white student population were in advanced placement classes in high school, 40% of the Asian population, just 5% of the Black population, 9% of the Hispanic, and 7% of low income. So what does Champaign continue to try to do to balance schools? They had their gifted programs at predominantly northern schools at Booker T. Washington, Stratton, Garden Hills, Dr. Howard. Kenwood is in the south. It is a year-round school. That did not work, however, and starting this year, they have eliminated the gifted program at elementary schools from Champaign Schools. They then tried, they got that first grant to make magnet schools, and they've gotten a grant since then. So at BTW, they made it a science, technology, engineering, and math school. Garden Hills, at first they tried an international baccalaureate program. If you know anything about that program, that's a very tough program. And within a couple of years, Unit 4 found they could not quite meet the criteria to call that an international baccalaureate program. So they changed it to a math and engineering leadership school. At Stratton, they started with a micro society, which was a really nice program, but wasn't attracting the people they wanted to. So they changed it to Stratton Academy of the Arts. So where are we now? Public schools, and now we've got Urbana in here too. So in Champaign, the percentage of Black students in the public schools is 37%. In 2002, it was 31%, so it's gone up a little bit. In Urbana, population of Black students, 38.4. Statewide, Black students are at 16.6%. White students in Champaign are at 32.2%. In 2002, they were at 61%. So the white student population has gone down quite a bit. Urbana right now is at 29.6%, and I don't have the figures from 2002 for Urbana. In the state, white population in public schools is 46.7%. Hispanic has gone from 13.5 or from 3% in 2002 to 13.5%. In Urbana, it's 16.5%. In the state, it's much higher. A quarter of the students in public schools are Hispanic. Asian has gone up in Champaign from 2002, where it was 5.5. It's now 8.6 in Urbana. It's currently at 4.5%, state is 5.4, and then you see the 2 or more designation. Low income students. In Champaign, we've got 56% of our students that meet the criteria for low income. It was 32.4% in 2002. In Urbana, it is 68%. The state average for low-income schools or for low-income students is 48.1%. So what's the general population? This is from the 2019 census. So Black people in Champaign are about 17.8%, but in our schools, 37%. Urbana at 17.7%, in their schools, 38.4%. White population in Champaign is 60.2%, but in our schools, it's 32.2%. In Urbana, it's 53.9%, but in the schools, 29.6%. And then you can see the Hispanic population. We actually have higher populations in the schools than what are in the community. Asian, it's lower. Asian in Champaign, 13.3%, in the schools, 8.6%, in Urbana, 18.9%, in the schools, 4.5%, and then 2 or more races in Champaign is 2.6% with 8.5% in the schools, 2.9% in Urbana with 9.6% in the schools. Low income in Champaign, 25% of our population is low income, 56% in the schools are low income. 30% in Urbana are low income, 68% in the schools are low income. So where have all the white, Asian, wealthy students gone? We have a high number of private select admit schools in Champaign-Urbana. We've got at least 15, there could be more. I tried to go through and find all the schools I could. 1 in 4 white students in Champaign-Urbana attend private schools. This was in 2018. 1 in 25 Black students attend private schools. And private schools, I looked at all the populations of the private schools, range from 94.1% white, which is Calvary Baptist Church. The lowest was 34.8% white, Next Generation, but that school is 42% Asian. And then 0% white at Canaan, that is set primarily to be a global majority school.
She is.
So free and reduced lunch. Remember, Champaign changed to free and reduced lunch. Has that worked? So what schools are supposed to be doing? This is in Champaign. I've got some Urbana schools up there too, but remember, Urbana schools do not have choice. So they are neighborhood schools. So they really don't have to fall within that 15% difference numbers. When we have choice, we should have no more than a 15% percentage point different from the numbers you see for Champaign at the bottom. So 37% of our students are Black. So no school should have more than 52% Black. You see Garden Hills and Stratton are not making that. They have far more Black students. 37%. Then the other end, if you take away 15, you've got 22%. Carrie Busey's not meeting that. Southside's close. But how about the white students? Garden Hills has very, very few white students, so they're not meeting it with white students either. Stratton is close to meeting it with white students. Carrie Busey has a little bit too many white students. Southside definitely has too many white students. Then look at Martin Luther King and Urbana. And remember, no choice here. So 38.4%, so their number is 62.5, so they have more Black students and they have fewer white students, but this is by neighborhood, so that neighborhood is fairly segregated. Yankee Ridge is coming pretty close to meeting being pretty balanced. Then if you also look at the free and reduced lunch statistics, Garden Hills in 2017, 71% were on free and reduced lunch. Today, 91%. And remember, they're supposed to be balanced, and this was supposed to work to create more balance, but it's actually gotten a lot worse at Garden Hills. Stratton, 79%, it's now at 82%, but still way off the mark of being within 15 percentage points of the bottom number, 56%. Yankee Ridge, 58% free and reduced lunch, now at 67.6%. They're pretty close to, even though this is, by neighborhood, they're pretty close to where they should be. Martin Luther King, 90%. So they've got more free and reduced lunch than most schools. Again, this is neighborhood segregation. Free and reduced lunch, though, now, because that was in 2017, they've actually gone down. So now it's at 74.7%, which is pretty close to 68%. So should public schools be racially balanced? If so, how? Neighborhoods in CU are still very, very segregated. So who's going to choose who gets bused? And in Champaign, I don't think the problem is as big in Urbana, but right now we can't get the students to school on time with current transportation, staffing issues. This year, many of our students arrive 30 minutes to an hour and a half late because of transportation issues. So this is an interesting question. I've heard some people say that there was not the difference in academic achievement until schools were integrated. All right, so now I'm going to switch a little bit and talk about a teacher who looks like me. This was a study done 2015 at the Upjohn Institute, said systemic bias in teacher expectations exists. Non-Black teachers were found to have lower expectations of Black students than Black teachers. So if that's the case, I don't know, is segregation better? It's hard to say. And I will say there are plenty of white teachers who do an outstanding job, but the average says that white teachers have lower expectations of Black students than Black teachers. In Champaign, a survey done, this is the Unit 4 school system, showed Black communities, educators, students, parents had a more negative perception of the Unit 4 climate than white communities. This is a problem nationwide. This is not unique to Champaign-Urbana. In 2017-18, the teachers in the nation were 79% white, 7% Black, 9% Hispanic, and 2% Asian. But then look at the students. The students are from the following year, but the students nationwide in public schools are 47% white, 27% Hispanic, 15% Black, 5% Asian. So if you're a white student, you have a great chance of having a teacher who looks like you. If you're a Hispanic student, you've got about a 1 in 3 chance of having a teacher that looks like you. Now it gets a little interesting because here's the teacher stats in Champaign-Urbana. These figures are from the Illinois State Report Card that anybody can view. In 2021 versus 2012, Champaign has 770 teachers, Urbana 348. White in 2021, in Champaign, 81.8% of our teachers are white. In Urbana, 75% of the teachers are white. In Champaign, only 8% of the teachers are Black. There are only 14 Black males teaching in Champaign with 47 females. In Urbana, it's slightly higher at 8.5% of their teachers. Hispanic teachers in Champaign is 4.6%. Urbana is almost double that at 9.4%. Asian, 5.2% in Champaign, 3.7% in Urbana. Now, when you look at 2012, though, in 2012 in Champaign, there were 84% white teachers. So it's gone down a little bit to 81.8%. But look at the Black teachers. In 2012, there were 10% Black teachers in Champaign. Now there's only 8%. Hispanic has gone up. It's a little more than doubled, and Asian has gone up. If you look at Urbana, however, in 2012, they had 83% white teachers. Their white teachers have gone down. They had 7% Black, that's gone up a little bit, 8.5%. But look at their Hispanic numbers, 1% in 2012, now 9.4%. So they've done a very good job at recruiting minority teachers. They still have a ways to go, but they're doing a lot better than Champaign is doing. Asian teachers, they had 1%, now they've got 3.7%. Administrator stats in Champaign-Urbana. These are just from 2021. In Champaign, 63.7% are white, Urbana 54.5%. Black, 28.6%, which isn't bad, but then look at Urbana, 38.4%, which is about the number of Black students they have in Urbana. Hispanic, Champaign 4.2%, administrators are Hispanic, and Urbana 8.7%. Asian 2.1%, there aren't any in Urbana. So finally, I want to look at the achievement gap, Black versus white in 2019. This is for Champaign. The next slide, we'll talk about Urbana. So this is 2019. The IAR is Illinois something readiness, but it's basically a test that everybody takes to determine if they are meeting what the state considers being proficient. So the first category to the left is English language arts. So those are your English type classes. So in Champaign, white students, 50% are meeting proficiency, 9% of our Black students, leaving a gap of 41% between achievement gap between Blacks and whites. Look at it in the state. White students, 48% are meeting. So Champaign's white students are a little bit above, but the Black students, 18%, which is still horrible, but it's twice what Champaign is. So the achievement gap is only, well, it's still large, but it's 30% versus 41% in Champaign. The next over to the right is the test for math. So in Champaign, 48% of our students are considered proficient, only 6% of our Black students with an achievement gap of 42%. In Illinois, only 42% of white students are proficient, but 12% of Black students are proficient. Again, a very horrible number, but twice what Champaign's number is. So in Urbana, in English language arts, the achievement gap is 27% between Blacks and whites, lower than the state gap of 30%, much lower than Champaign's gap of 40%. In math, the achievement gap is 28% between Blacks and whites, lower than the state gap of 30%. And again, much lower than the gap in Champaign of 41%. What I will say is whites in Urbana score lower on both ELA and math tests than whites in Champaign. Their scores are quite a bit lower, but their achievement gap is much closer. So what does this say about our community, about our culture, particularly about Champaign? I've showed you figures that show Urbana is moving in the right direction, but Champaign seems to be not moving in the right direction. I love the Champaign schools. I'm proud to work for them, but some of these statistics are a little bit shocking. So that is the end of my presentation. I will open it and see. I don't know if Renee wants to add anything.
Yeah, I can speak to some of the things. Not really, since I'm an administrator in Champaign, I don't, we haven't really compared the numbers between Champaign and Urbana. But yes, our numbers in Champaign are alarming. And I definitely think that you are on to something. If you compare some of the different pieces that you put up, for me, it tends to lead in one area. If you are talking about the achievement gap and closing the achievement gap, something I used to say when I was a teacher, I would always relate it to the zombie apocalypse, but I would always say that in Champaign, we spent so much time looking at, the dead bodies in the virus, but we never spent time looking at those that were able to survive. So what I meant by that was, if you were to look at studies of African-American students that are doing well, one thing you would see is that there's a resiliency that is built by one thing in their life. And what you'll start to see is that a lot of them had access to African-American teachers or administrators. I'm trying to wonder how much I should say. There is definitely a climate that exists in Champaign, and not necessarily to mention the school that I was at, but I can tell you there was one point where I was the only Black teacher. And then when I came back as administrator, there was one point when I was the only Black certified staff member. Well, I was the only Black face, period. In 2018, I received children's teeth in inter-school mail, meaning somebody on my staff sent me this ominous package with children's teeth in it. And ultimately, because I was embarrassed, I kind of kept it quiet. But, my principal knew and upper knew. And I was just kind of told to just kind of get back in there, hold the torch, and nothing was done. One of the hardest things for me in my career has been knowing that the truth doesn't always come out. And as I would say to my staff, if I can receive this treatment and I'm a supervisor, what do you think this says about what our children face when they come to this school? So one of the things that I would argue the most is, as you see the decline in Black staff and Black administration, that has a lot to do with your achievement gap. That's the one thing that hasn't been tried. That's the one thing that we cannot grasp. How do we get more Black teachers, or how do we keep Black teachers? Because they are leaving. I can tell you there are times when I have been like, it's too much to handle mentally. But your research shows that because of the intersectionality of being, a Black woman, you've been left out of things because of your gender as a woman, or you've been left out of things because of your race as a Black person, that you have an understanding of low income. You have an understanding of, the different pieces that some people can't grasp. So it puts you in a great position to be someone to train. So as I would tell people, if I can't get any more Black teachers, I'm going to look at the white teachers I have, and I am going to make them the best I possibly can, because I want to get them to understand these other parts. And you will find that there are phenomenal white teachers out there who are able to do it, but they get lumped in to those that can't. Or you'll hear like, hey, we can't get this done, or they're just not ready. And it's not true. So I think for me, even though it comes to seats and those, you give me any type of kid, I'm going to teach them. Those are my babies. And that's one piece of, educational leadership that I will stand by. You give me a kid, that is my baby until I send them back home. And even still, they're still my babies. And that needs to be what all educators and all administrators say when these kids come. And unfortunately, it's not.
Thanks, Renee. I see Mark Butler's on too. I don't know if you want to add anything or not.
Hello, everyone. But can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
I do agree pretty much with what Renee has said about the district, and I don't have any further comment, but I do agree with everything that she has said.
Okay. Thanks. Questions from the audience?
So Lauren, I'm wondering about the resources available, if that has, per school, if that has equalized any over the years, because I know for a long time, the schools in the white neighborhoods had more resources, more money because of the property tax issue, having more money there. And then the schools in the lower income neighborhoods having less funding. Is that still an issue? Has anything been done to sort of resolve how to get the resources equalized among all schools in Champaign in particular?
No, I think, and I don't know this for sure, this is not an area I have a lot of knowledge, but I'm pretty sure they're pretty equalized. In fact, with those magnet grants, a lot of it would be BTW, Garden Hills, and Stratton are actually receiving more money than some of the other schools.
Lauren, you talked about the impact of private schools on the public schools and the racial differences. What about the impact of people moving from Champaign-Urbana into Savoy and Mahomet as a way of taking their children out of integrated schools? Are there any numbers there?
I don't have that, but I know it's done on a regular basis. I mean, they don't count as the population of Champaign anymore because they actually live in Mahomet, but that has been done a lot. I mean, Mahomet's probably the #1 place, followed by maybe St. Joe, followed by Monticello. People that work in Champaign that say, hey, I don't think they'll tell you that that's the reason that they're moving there. But I would suspect that it is. And this was about 5 years ago. My daughter was writing for the Mahomet Citizen. And there's a neighborhood that's in Champaign where they actually advertised it as Champaign Address Mahomet Schools. It's a very small neighborhood, and I can't remember the name of it. It's on the far west of Champaign, but that was why they did it. So.
A question of Ms. Westfield about the white teachers with whom you've had success in making them sensitive and more effective teachers. And I'm particularly interested in how you either inculcate or find pre-existing in teachers this sense that if you're in school and in my class, you belong to me. I'm your responsibility. You're my baby, as you said. They don't teach that in college, I don't think, to teachers. But what kinds of, where do you see the success? What kinds of traits do you see developing or emerging when you've been successful with retraining a teacher?
What I have noticed, and honestly, that's something that I've kind of wanted to do a study on, but there's, I know you talk about the idea of allyship. And what I realize is that these are often teachers who have not self-proclaimed allyship, but have done things towards them. I think of one white teacher who I am just constantly in awe of. He was born and raised in Mahomet. Father was a Vietnam vet. And this man is just unapologetic about the things he's going to do to ensure that his class makes it. I mean, he is, we say relationship building, but it's almost cliche, but for him, he's a part of your family. Parents have no problem reaching out. He has no problem reaching out to parents. He'll do the pop-up on your job. If you didn't make it to, parent teacher conference, he's on the way, or he's going to text you and say, hey, I noticed you didn't make it. Would you like to meet somewhere else? And it is this idea of, it's like a village mentality. And I know that that's something that we're all used to, but this younger generation isn't, but he's got that. And it is, you're his when you're in his classroom, and even after. Parents will still reach out. He has no problem going anywhere. He has no problem showing up. And it's just wonderful to watch. So when I see, it's often like pairing other younger teachers with him, he'll kind of instill that into those same characteristics. And so it's trying to find those pieces and pulling them out of people. And, I understand people will say teachers have so much going on, but it makes it so much easier when you look at it as family. That's going to work with your Hispanic students, and it's definitely going to work with your African American students. The idea of family, I can trust you. So what he does is he bridges that gap. He builds that trust, and then his name, he's the name that's in the community. People are saying, if your kid is going to go to such and such grade, you want this teacher. And it's amazing to watch. But he grew up poor kid in Muhammad, and there's just something about him. He's a great teacher.
Thank you.
I am a parent of kids who went to Unit 4, and I have to say that I am so grateful for the African American teachers that they had that influenced them, that it was, Mrs. Green who called Emma her baby. And it was the relationships that, it wasn't so much the academics within that classroom that made a difference for my kids. It was the relationship, and how all three of these three African-American teachers, that was the goal for them, was to build the relationship, give them the self-confidence, and it worked. And right now, the struggle for me is that I don't want to be the ostrich with my head in the sand anymore. And it is so important for me that there are more teachers of color who are hired. And so, as a person who's no longer have kids in the public school system, but see the value in this and the difference that it can make, what action do we need to take?
I think one thing is just pay attention to what's going on in your school districts as much as you can. Champaign right now, the union teachers will be giving a virtual presentation, I believe Tuesday night, and I don't know yet how to connect to that. And in-person meeting on, I don't know what day, it was in the paper yesterday, about what the board and administration are asking for this longer school day, things like that. I think that's one way, is to pay attention to what the teachers are saying. Teachers are in the classroom every day. They really see what's going on. Administrators might be there for a couple of minutes to look into a class, but they're not there for the whole day to really see and understand the struggles. I think that's one important thing, is really listening to our teachers. One thing I will say about recruiting global majority teachers, I used to speak at the U of I to like their intro to education classes. It's been 5 or 6 years since I did that. About 95% of the kids in that class were white, mostly female. Very few global majority students in there. So we've got to, it's hard because we've got to get more global majority teachers in, so kids see teachers like that, they have a good experience in school, and they want to go into teaching. Because if you have a bad experience at school, why would you ever pick teaching as what you wanted to do? I think encouraging people, I love to get as many volunteers as I can into the school district, just, teach with somebody, see that. It's still, we do have more of the global majority that are coming to volunteer in our schools now, I would say. I don't know if Renee or Mark has any other ideas, but it's a hard problem.
So Laura,
I think a good idea would be, if you want to attend board meetings
Yeah.
of the school district. That's a good way to get involved and ask questions and pay attention there on what's going on with the schools. So I always recommend attending board meetings.
So My involvement's been years ago. I used to coach track at Urbana Middle School, and for the most part, we had a few incidences at smaller rural schools where my kids would be called names. Excuse me.
Daryl, you mean the kids on your teams were called names? Yeah.
And that would be at events when you went to events outside of the school? I mean, with other communities?
Yeah, the kids themselves seem to get along pretty well. I didn't really hear anything. There was one that was particularly bad. But I was just wondering, with the change in culture in the hallways and the classrooms, has it gotten worse, or are kids still relatively respectful of each other?
In the schools, I would say, and I'm not in the schools every day, so it could be that Mark or Renee might be able to answer this better, but I would say kids are fairly respectful of each other. I do a homework club at Garden Hills, and this was about 5 or 6 years ago. I do remember one student in the club had some very racist ideas, and he said they came from his parents. So I think they're still there, but I would say as a whole, when they're actually at school, I don't see it as much from the kids. I don't know, Renee, Mark, maybe you disagree with that.
I can share. I have, and this is a story that happened last week. We have a transgender student at school, and the parent was worried about her child, or the mother had a perception that her child was being bullied, and they were calling her daughter names. And I had to explain to the mother, and she cried on the phone. It makes me emotional too, that I told her, no, that's not true. The kids are so accepting of her and who she is and her identity. Everybody loves her. Everybody's always around her. Everybody wants to get to know her. So I would agree to a certain extent that students are respectful. And then I want to add too, also, that they're more accepting of things that are new. And I can really appreciate that in the students. And I'm an administrator here in the district. I'm an African-American male district administrator in the district, and I pride my students at my school that they are more accepting of something that is new. Of course, you do have those who might have a comment here or there, but it's not like how it used to be. So I say things are getting much better with the students.
And I would have to, I want to say I'm spoiled because my the babies at my school, I don't want to say they're perfect because they're not, but I think they are. But to be honest, yes, we have kids that will make mistakes, but it's, you let them know, okay, you fail, but now it's time to get up from that mistake. There are those teaching opportunities that happen, that I would say a lot of us make sure actually happen. So if a kid does make a mistake, 9 times out of 10, it's something they've heard elsewhere. And we know right now in our society, adults are really, really poopy towards each other. So I'd expect the kids to follow suit. But at school, when we're able to get the kids, it's when that kid makes that mistake, it is a teaching opportunity. You don't just let them go. You don't just suspend them. It's time for that talk. And then you continue to build on that. And then you call the student in when there are other pieces, and then you let that student teach it. So, I mean, if they learn it from us, and they could easily learn, to be better to each other from us. But I will also say I'm spoiled. My kids know, like Miss Westfield, she's going to be in your business, and she's strict and everything else, but they know I love them to death. And if they're right, I'm in it. I tell my babies all the time, you don't have to fight. Let me do it for you. And if you're right, I got you. If you're wrong, I'm gonna tell you you're wrong. And we're gonna work through it. But it's the idea of not letting them go because they made a mistake. I've had a student use some language towards me, and I realized he didn't even know what he was saying. And other people like, oh, didn't that offend you? No, not really. He didn't even understand. I'm like, and then afterward, when he seeks me out, this Black woman who he just called and, wanting hugs and everything else. And like I told him, I didn't like you in the moment, but when it was over with, I understand you are my baby and I still love you to death, still love him. And he needed to know that he could rebound from his mistake. And so I would have to agree. Our schools can be a mess, but our kids are so worth fighting for.
Just to clarify that issue for Daryl just a bit, as the track coach in that particular situation, his team was at a small rural school and his kids were getting a lot of abuse from the other kids from the other school. And one of his kids ended up getting particularly upset, and he's the one who got in trouble for reacting. And he did react in a pretty aggressive way. No one was hurt or anything, but he was the only one that ended up getting a consequence from the situation. And the folks that had been picking at him and the whole team the whole time they were there, it was a difficult situation for Daryl and the kids, all that were involved. So.
Cute.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, I would say, I always encourage people to volunteer in an Urbana school and a Champaign school. With all the COVID, a lot of our teachers are exhausted. We're short teachers. So anybody that can come in for an hour a week and read with students or work on math, you can help begin to close the achievement gap. I truly believe that's what a lot of our kids need is one-on-one attention, not a longer school day. But it's a tough issue. It is nationwide. It's not just in Champaign-Urbana. But for whatever reason, it seems to be slightly worse in Champaign than it is in Urbana right now. So, but I will say I did not look at the history way back for Urbana, but when I Googled things, nothing from Urbana came up, whereas lots of stuff for Champaign came up.
Wasn't there a man named Taylor Thomas who was instrumental, a Black man named Taylor Thomas who was very prominent in the Urbana school district in the 60s?
No, but I did see, I think it was on the news last night. It was something with Evelyn Underwood, and there was a group of 6 people that really helped push desegregation in the Urbana schools, and they were called the Something Six. I don't know if he was part of that group or not.
Ellis Park 6.
Yes, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
all right. Lauren, do you know if if throughout the state or even the nation, the prevalence of developing alternative schools for children to pull them out of public schools, is that elsewhere as it is here?
Is that what?
Are there as many of those popping up in other communities as here?
You mean charters? Because we don't really have any charter schools here, but
the independent schools.
Yeah, I don't know that, but Champaign-Urbana has a lot of independent schools. The new high school, and I'm blank, Academy High, that just popped up in the last 6 years, 5 years maybe. And they're getting more and more kids there. So, hey, Chris.
Hey. Oh, hold on. Oh, hello there. Sorry, I was trying to get on. It was a little difficult, but I'm here now. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're just about done, but if you have you've seen the slide presentation, if you have any comments to add to anything.
No, well, when they were talking about the independent schools and some charter schools and things like that, I know, I don't know if you talked about the charter school that they were thinking about, that a group in Champaign, was trying to put together. Did you happen to talk about that at all?
I didn't, but that wasn't that long ago because it was Craig Walker and some other people, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was about Renee. Was that maybe 2 years ago or three? Was it longer than that?
I want to say it was 16 or
About
17. Yes, because
Okay.
they actually asked me to write the sped portion of it. So I want to say it was 16 or 17.
Right. The one thing that I think was one of the reasons why it didn't go through. One, it was a lot of it was how it was written. I really think if there were some other people who were involved with that and really laid it out, it would have had a much stronger level of support through the community. But a lot of it was just poorly written. Um, did you get a chance to talk about just education in general in Unit 4?
I talked about the achievement gap a little bit.
Okay.
Beyond that, no, not a lot. We talked about the teachers, the number of teachers. There's only 14 Black males in the Champaign School District that are teachers.
Yeah, there's only 77 certified, where I would say, well, we're in part of the union, CFT, so not in administration, in terms of either teachers or psychologists, counselors, social workers, but there's only 77 of us. And at one point in time, for about, I don't know if it's still the same, but I know for about 20 years, I was the only Black male science teacher in both high schools. And so that was about, I think it's been about 20 years. I don't know if, I think there's a Black science teacher in middle school. But yeah, I think I was maybe Charles Drake after he got out of PE, but for years, I was the only Black male science teacher in the entire school district for a long, long time. And a lot of that has to do with the education that children of color are getting throughout the United States, right? And we think about why are they not going into education? And people ask that question all the time, and it makes me chuckle a little. And I'm going, okay, you must not know what it's like for Black people in a public school system. Because when you ask that question, why are there not more, people of color that are going into education? Well, when you're subjugated in a way, when you're marginalized, when your cultural capacity is not honored, when it is, for my life, it was more about assimilation into another person's culture than in acceptance of my own culture as valuable in the discussion. And so that doesn't garner someone wanting to go into that world where they're not really accepted, right? And I talk about the idea of desegregation, and I say, it looked good on paper. When we ask why there is an achievement gap, it started all the way back then, right? When you have children who have to be bused from an area where they were loved to an area where they are not loved. And they're forced into schools, into classrooms where teachers did not welcome them with open arms. And this is across the entire United States, right? And so those are some of the things that we really have to look at and think as in today's world, right? We still have individuals who are raised and brought up in monocultures and then say, oh, let's go into education and let's teach, these children of the global majority, when your entire life has been in a monoculture, and you will look at things entirely through a white lens, and you will teach from a white lens and not really look at the other children of color as often with equal value. And it's a brainwash thing. It's not conscious. It's just something that's often taught. But anyway, I don't know what I added or took away from that in the conversation.
I will say one other thing Renee had mentioned is it's so powerful when a student of the global majority has a teacher of the global majority. And I will have to add, it's also really powerful when a white student has a teacher of the global majority. Renee was my daughter's 4th grade teacher, and the stuff she did for my daughter is amazing. And all of her kids were her babies, and they still are. But just that was, I think, my daughter's maybe first realization, like, okay, not everybody's, like me. And just some of the exercises Renee had in her class, pairing students with students who were different than them was just amazing. So I think it makes a huge difference in their worldview for white students to also have teachers of the global majority.
Absolutely. And we spoke a few weeks ago. For me, it's also an issue of empathy, right? In really being able to look at another person and think about what shoes they're walking in, and also try to walk in those shoes, that person's shoes, and try to see from their perspective. It is a lot about empathy, right? How much do we care about other humans, right? And I think that's where we need to really start addressing things, looking at just empathy, and then asking ourselves, how much do we really value all humans? Do we feel that one set of humans are better than another set of humans, right? We have to look at our biases. We have to start examining what we've been told, what has been said to us as truth, and then we have to re-examine that. And it's a personal journey, because there are going to be some people who will say, no, I really don't believe that all people are equal. And then there may be some who will say, yes, no, all people are equal. But that's right in here, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we probably gone a little bit past, but I would just say, I think one reason to do things like this is, if you are white, you generally grew up with pretty strong biases. And I have realized this over the past years, but by learning more about history and culture, Black culture. I have not done a lot about Hispanic culture. I need to do that, but it just makes me so much more aware. So I think for those of us from this church, I think just the more we can learn, what we heard from Chad Hoffman about housing segregation 2 weeks ago in Champaign-Urbana, it's just incredible, because I was unaware of so much of this. And I think learning is a big part. So thank you to everybody that stayed today, particularly thanks to Renee, to Mark, to Chris, for joining us. And I have to say, Chris was my daughter's track coach or cross country coach. So we've been friends for quite a while. So, but I appreciate you guys coming on. It's not always an easy thing to do.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Lauren, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, thank you, Lauren, for doing something like this, because again, it makes my heart feel good to know that there are empathetic people there. There are people who care, who may not know what all to do, but are wanting to do more and better. And that's all you can ask.
Yeah, I agree, Lauren. Thank you so much for being willing to do this. This is useful information. The thing that jumped out to me about this is race is a huge part, but economics is a big part too. There is an economic divide between those that have and those that don't. When you look at the free lunch ratios and the poverty ratios, until we can talk about class in addition to about race, we won't make as much progress as we need to.
Yep, that's true. Very true.
So thank you very much, Lauren, and thank you for presenting this and showing us the numbers. This is really important for us to know.
Yeah, I second that very strongly. Both you and the experts you've brought with you, Lauren. Thank you so very much.
Mhm. All
I
right, well,
learned a
have a good
lot.
afternoon.
Thanks a lot. Mm.